Gaza is on the brink of starvation. For some, it's already too late. While Israel continues to block aid from entering, Palestinians are desperately trying to find ways to survive, and those outside of Gaza are trying to find ways to help. But what can actually be done to confront this humanitarian disaster? I'm Myriam Francois, and this is The Stream. The situation in Gaza is getting worse by the day. Let's take a look at the numbers to get an understanding of the extent of the devastation. At least 500,000 people are facing a man-made famine. All 2.3 million people are experiencing acute food shortages. And children are dying daily now due to malnutrition as the death toll continues to rise. The reality of this famine is that the dangers are coming from multiple sides, which all compound each other as the crisis remains unaddressed. To help us understand the varied and interconnected risks associated with famine, we have a guest with us who's been working with many NGOs to help coordinate aid through the Rafah crossing. Amira Nimerawi is a social impact specialist for the Palestinian Medical Relief Society and the CEO of Health Workers for Palestine. Amira, thank you so much for being with us. Now, UN officials say that Gaza is on the brink of famine. What does that actually mean?
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really glad that we started with this question because I think it's really important to unpack the language that's being used. And so if I may, I'd like to answer this question in two parts. And the first is to sort of highlight that when we use language like the brink of famine, it sort of sounds like to the average person that's maybe not in this particular field and not aware of the technicalities associated with this kind of definition, that there is food and it's about to run out. But I need to be really blunt here because the reality is that the people in Gaza have been starving now for months. And we've already started to see, as you pointed out in the introduction, children are starting to die on a daily basis because of this issue of starvation and lack of access to food. I know people that are living in the northern parts of Gaza on a carrot a day, if they're lucky. Sometimes they need to split up, these types of rations with their families. I know people, including my husband's family in the southern parts of Gaza, that are living on a whole family to one tin of beans a day, if they're lucky. So, I think that it's really important to sort of highlight that the word famine is a technical term, and it's used by organizations like the United Nations to sort of assess the severity of a situation. But it's stages, and it's actually broken up into 5 different stages where you're looking at things like food insecurity, which is split into 2 different levels when we're looking at the official sort of definitions and assessments. You're looking at food access as well as livelihoods, because obviously if people aren't earning an income, they're not able to access food because they're not able to buy it. Maybe there's not NGOs working in those areas that can actually provide the food, as we're seeing in Gaza with the blockade. And then you're sort of looking at the humanitarian crisis, and then you come to the point of famine. One of the sort of more easier ways to sort of assess whether or not you're reaching the famine status is whether 30% of the children in that particular area are malnourished. Now, what we're seeing already right now is that in the northern parts of Gaza, 31% of children are now considered severely malnourished. And I just want to highlight that that's a really extreme, stark jump from the statistics that we were looking at in January, where it was only 15.6%, and now we're looking at 32% in the northern parts of Gaza. Already as well in the southern parts of Gaza, where some of the aid is getting in and there is more flow of access to food, although it's extremely limited, children already have reached in that area 28%. And the UNICEF reports that's just released in the last few days is really highlighting that the speed at which the severity of malnutrition amongst children and the rate of deaths now is expected to increase exponentially, and it's extremely dangerous. So I think it's important that when we're looking at this sort of technical terminology, that we're not forgetting the fact that people in Gaza have been literally starving and suffering the consequences of that starvation for months now.
Yeah, I mean, I also wanted to ask you about this statement that a UN spokesperson has made, saying that once famine is declared, it's too late. So can you explain to us what that means?
Yes, certainly. So, when we're looking at severe and chronic malnourishment, we shouldn't just be looking at the death toll. We need to be looking at the wider and bigger picture. And so, there's certain complications that arise specifically in children because they're the most vulnerable groups when it comes to starvation and a death toll that stems from that, and also dehydration. So that's another important point. When we're looking at this definition, it's not just food, it's also including water. And we know that water supplies in Gaza for months since the 7th of October have also been severely limited. And so, what this person is alluding to is the fact that there are multiple comorbidities, illnesses that arise as a result of malnutrition, which in children we see sepsis, so that's a systemic full body infection that can also be fatal. We're looking at developmental delays, we're looking at mental health issues, we're looking at cardiac issues. And even once you start to introduce food, it's not just a matter of opening the floodgates and people having access to food and just sort of consuming as they would normally. It's actually a medical condition that needs to be observed by people that are experts in this particular area, where they're introducing the nutrition on a regimen that's specific to that person and to their needs to ensure that a syndrome called refeeding syndrome doesn't occur, which can actually be fatal.
Now, before I bring in my guest, I just want to very briefly ask you if you can summarize for us, as somebody who regularly coordinates aid into Gaza, some of the challenges that you and others are facing in trying to get aid into the Strip.
So to summarize it quickly, the main issue is the fact that Israel is continuing its 17-year siege and blockade on Gaza. This, unfortunately, is nothing new for the people of Gaza in terms of having limited access to supplies. Now, before the 7th of October, there were 500 trucks going in on a daily basis, and now we're averaging around 130. But obviously, the needs have increased because of the sheer devastation and scale of the humanitarian crisis, which, as you quite rightly pointed out, is a man-made situation. Yeah. So it's a multifaceted issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for that summary, Amira. Let's welcome two more guests now who are joining us for this conversation. Alon-Lee Green is the National Co-Director of Standing Together, a Jewish Palestinian grassroots movement working for a shared and equal future. He joins us from New York. And Tarazi, a resident of occupied East Jerusalem and the founder and director of Pilgrims for Peace. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Alon-Lee, if I might start with you, your group was recently involved in trying to push aid through at the Rafah crossing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization you work with and what you've been trying to do lately?
Yes, sure. So Standing Together is a Jewish Palestinian grassroots movement fighting within the Israeli society, within the borders of Israel, among the Palestinian citizens of Israel and the Jewish citizens of Israel, to end the occupation, to end the war, to achieve Israeli-Palestinian peace, and to kind of build a reality where we are all equal and free and independent. Before October 7th, we were active against the occupation. Now we're urgently working to end this war and to build the majority within our society to resist this reality that we see in front of our eyes. We do so because we understand that, having a reality where millions of people, millions of Palestinians are living under military control or living in Gaza without the basic rights and freedoms, it is not something that we can be silent when we see it, but not only out of solidarity towards the Palestinians, also because we understand this is not the self-interest of the Israeli people. We see our leadership really destroying the ability to have a normal life in Gaza, and that destroys the ability of us having a normal life in Israel. We understand the interconnectedness of this reality, and we're working to try and stop it and to bring it into the public discussion. And that's the reason we led the food and aid convoys from cities in Israel directly to the border in Gaza, and we're stopped by the Israeli army.
Salman, I want to bring you in here, of course, as a Palestinian yourself, watching the reaction of the international community to the famine unfolding. What more could be happening from your perspective? What more could you be hoping might be done?
Are you referring to the international community of activists? That is an amazing achievement of the global community to stand with justice and with Palestinian rights and against occupation and against oppression. Whereas if you're talking about politics and politicians who have been trying to even create legislations that condemn such actions as threatening, I think there is much to be done on both sides. Alon, for example, has been doing this internally, bringing Palestinians, living Israeli citizens, as well as Israelis, bringing them together to come towards a common understanding and a common ground, only to step forward for now, because there is so much work to be done. I mean, we have been, the international community has been telling us stories for 75 years. Palestinians are quite tired of such rhetoric and words. If it is up to us, we would allow the communities that are standing towards justice for them to make the decision. We would need the International Court of Justice, and currently it's order on Israel to allow humanitarian aid and not further the possibilities of genocide, for all of this to be implemented by the international community who has put down these laws and regulations. Otherwise, we're living in the wilderness.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of the situation inside Gaza. Let's take a look at this from our digital correspondent who is there in Gaza, called Myriam. She's there telling us about the dire situation for mothers in Gaza.
Babies are just starving, are just facing immediate death and immediate malnutrition due to the lack of baby formula provided to them. Baby formula even unavailable in the markets or at high prices and expensive prices that people cannot provide during such conditions. As you can see here in the surroundings of Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah in the central area of Gaza, people are just living in tents in dire conditions, where without electricity, without water, without even the basic needs. For me, I am a mother of a 6-month baby, and I'm facing the same problem. Yet I'm able somehow to provide the baby formula for my son. For me, I changed the type of the baby formula for my son more than 11 times in a row because of the inavailability of the baby milk in the markets. But it's for the rest of families, and the most, the majority of these families, it's very challenging to provide the baby formula.
هذه آخر علبة حليب معايا لبنتي، زي ما انتم شايفينها فاضية، ما فيش فيها ضايل غير رضعتين يعني أو رضعة تقريبا، لأن أنا مقتصدة فيها لأن معيش حليب ومعيش مصاري أجيب لها حليب. كل 6 أيام بدي علبة حليب زي هذه، وهذه علبة الحليب حقها 35 شيكل ببيعونا إياها، وأنا مش مقتدرة يعني إني أجيب كل 6 أيام 35 شيكل علبة حليب زي هيك.
Babies cannot live, in such condition. They cannot bear the sense of hunger or to be exposed to the sense of starvation that people in Gaza are living through these days. So the situation here in Gaza, for the families, for the babies, for the kids, for the children, it's just catastrophic. It needs an urgent help and an urgent intervention to save the lives of babies who are suffering from hunger and starvation.
Amira, off the back of that, can you tell us some of the challenges that are specifically affecting mothers in Gaza right now?
Yeah, so I think for me, as a previous nurse that worked with mothers in the postnatal wards, it's really distressing to hear these types of reports, as you've seen from these mothers, where the severity of the lack of access to food and water has affected a mother's ability to be able to produce breast milk and to be able to feed her children, which in this particular context would be the most ideal solution because of the lack of access to clean water. It's extremely dangerous when you're dealing with newborns and young children under 2 years of age when you don't have access to clean water. So, this is what we're seeing, is that there's 5,500 women every single month that are delivering in Gaza. So it's about 180 women a day. Without access to safe spaces or clean spaces or hygiene kits or even safe birthing kits, without access to anesthesia. I mean, I just want to point out that the situation for the newborns is so dire, especially for those women that don't have access to formula or they don't have access to clean water, because that's the thing, you need access to both at the same time, and either they're getting one or the other and they're not able to have both. We've seen the images of mothers putting dates to pacify the newborn babies in their mouths, but I've started to see videos now where babies are crying and there's no tears because they're so malnourished and so dehydrated that their body's not even able to produce tears. It's such an unnatural state. You have 2 mothers being killed every single hour in Gaza. You have a lack of access to sanitary supplies. There's, thousands of dignity and sanitary packs going in. However, you have over 600,000 women of menstruating age not able to access the packs, let alone the water that you need to be able to bathe yourselves. And this is also extremely important postpartum. It can lead to infertility. It can lead to infections, which can actually cause, even further deaths. I think also we need to highlight for women in Gaza right now, it's extremely unsafe. There are no safe spaces. The reports coming out of sexual harassment, gender-based violence. I mean, the list goes on. We haven't even touched on the silent work that women do in carrying the families. You have 3,000 new female-led households because their husbands have been killed or abducted.
Thank you, Amira. The Israeli government has blamed the lack of aid on a failure in distribution by the aid organizations. Let's take a look at this Instagram post by Kogat. The problem isn't opening more crossings. The problem is distributing the aid to the people of Gaza. The international organizations do not have the capacity and have yet to take real steps to improve on the distribution of aid across Gaza, including in the north. Alon-Lee, I want to bring you in on this. The problem is the aid organizations?
I read the responses of the Israeli army and the Israeli government, and I'm just shocked. I mean, we all have eyes, we all have ears, and we see the refusal of our ministers, the declarations of our ministers not to bring aid to Gaza. This is a direct policy, direct strategy of the Israeli government of starvation. And we see it, we read all the news, we understand that there are settlers coming every day from the West Bank to block trucks from getting in, while we are blocked to get to the same place that the settlers are with our food and aid convoy. And I'm a Jewish citizen of Israel. So I want to talk about my society for a second. If someone thinks that this serves us, if someone thinks that we benefit from such extreme Kahanist, Messianic people that control Israel, that are creating starvation as a direct policy, as an open policy, they are wrong. We will also lose from this reality. Palestinians are paying an unbearable price right now in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. By the way, don't forget what happens on the West Bank on a daily level. People there are not allowed to work. People there are suffering from settlers' violence. And we understand that we hit this historic junction, a historic junction where we, as an Israeli, even as Jewish society, we need to decide whether we're going to the path of eternal war, occupation, more settlements, more violence, and letting every person on this land pay a terrible price, not only the Palestinians, and we need to understand it, or we choose to go in a direction of ending the occupation, of achieving a reality of freedom, equality, and independence for all. And it is this moment that to understand that the Israeli leadership is refusing to go in the path of peace, to go in the path of actually fixing the reality. This war is only making things worse for the Palestinians, but also for the Israelis.
Alon-Lee, you mentioned the Israeli leadership there. Samer, the EU said recently that Israel is deliberately using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza. As a Palestinian who's lived under occupation your whole life, what do you see as the end goal here for the Israeli leadership?
I mean, the actions of Israel have been the same. They have just been quite amplified to genocidal levels over the past 5.5, 6 months. The intention, we should listen to Israelis. There are two different types of Israelis, and I think we see this war going on internally as well as externally among our brethren in the Jewish community. There is a fight of Zionism and how Zionism has infected the Jewish mind, has created the state of Israel in the beginning, and was very instrumental and beneficial in creating in the start a socialist government. We have to remember that the beginning that caused the 750,000 Palestinians to be kicked out of their homes, their villages, their towns, their cities, everything, was a socialist left-leaning government that came to establish kibbutzes. Also, the next huge massacre was the invasion of Lebanon, which was also a socialist government. Right now, we're dealing with a government that has brought in people who they have not only condemned, but they have charged as terrorists. And these are the people running the government, unfortunately, for both us Palestinians, for the Israelis, for the Palestinians living in Israel, for everyone.
Well, on that note, on that note,
yes.
Samir, I just want to bring this in. Alon-Lee, I want to ask you about these statistics from February. A new Israeli Democracy Institute survey shows that 68% of Jewish Israelis oppose the transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza residents. We've even seen some of these people, as you mentioned, blocking aid from getting into Gaza. To many observers, this just seems unbelievable. How do you make sense of this?
Well, it is a very, very, very difficult thing to operate right now under this feeling of fear and trauma. We can be angry about the fact that Israelis are feeling fear. We can condemn it, but it will not change the reality that the Israeli society is heavily traumatized right now after the massacre of Hamas on October 7th. And we do need to understand that there are spaces in our society to convince, to try and build this political narrative, this political story, that the occupation does not serve us as Israelis, that we do not gain any safety, any safe life out of oppressing millions of people that live on the same land, that get less rights than us or no rights at all, while we live on the land and control people that are not the citizens of our country. And we do need to understand that working in the Israeli society, trying to change these trends, to change this government, to change also the other governments. I acknowledge that also other governments, also leaning to the left, have deepened the occupation and oppressed the Palestinian people as well. But there's no way to bypass the Israeli society. There's no way to bypass the Palestinian society. There are two people living on this land, 7 million Palestinians, and they're going nowhere, but next to them, 7 million Jewish people, and they're going nowhere as well. So we need to understand that in order to build the political capacity with, or the political will with our society to achieve peace, to end the occupation, to end this war, it's a hard work. It's not a very rewarding one, but we need to engage in it.
Alon-Lee, thank you so much. I want to give Amira the last word here. Amira, we know obviously there are people from all over the world looking at this thinking they desperately want to help. What can people be doing at this stage? Just very, very briefly, please.
So I think that, you know, it's really important that we're looking at the big picture. I know that it's really emotive and sometimes we're compelled to be reactive. We might want to just donate to an organization that's offering some sort of food supply or other humanitarian needs. But I think that we need to zoom out. We need to look at the bigger picture and we need to look at sustainability here. So I really urge, you know, anyone that's wanting to help donate. I'm never going to stop people from wanting to contribute to the very serious needs. But I think that, you know, we need to start taking these actions and these conversations to the next step. We need to be organizing locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally. Look at Health Workers for Palestine as an example. It stemmed from 2 doctors in the UK who did not want to be censored any longer in speaking out in solidarity with health workers in Palestine and specifically in Gaza. And it's grown now to a global movement. You don't have to know all of the steps that you need to take in front of you, but you just need to know that you want, as we've all said here today, justice for the Palestinians and to stand with humanity and to work together collectively to end the siege and the occupation, not just in Gaza, but in Palestine. Because if we don't do that, this is going to continue. This isn't the first time starvation has been used as a weapon in Gaza.
Thank you so much. Amira, Alon-Lee and Samir, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, thank you all for watching. Once again, stay in touch online on social media. Send us your questions and suggestions using the hashtag or the handle AJStream. Take care, and I'll see you soon.